Chapter 16 of the Romance of Modern Engineering. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Romance of Modern Engineering by Archibald Williams. Chapter 16, Ocean Leviathans. In 1858, the genius of Brunel sprang a wonder upon the world. The monster steamship constructed at Millwall from his designs by Mr. Scott Russell was not merely an advance upon all that had gone before, a Gulliver among pygmies. She was an anachronism, one of the first liners to be built of iron, which was but slowly superseding wood, and to be driven by the newly developed screw, combined in this case with powerful paddle wheels. The Great Eastern was also a sudden expansion in dimensions and capacity, which held the record for nearly 50 years. Yet she was doomed from her very inception to be a gigantic failure, the frequent fate of enterprises born before their due time. Her keel was laid on May 1st, 1854, and after 3 years' labor, during which 30,000 iron plates were fastened upon the hull by means of 3,000,000 rivets, the great ship was ready to be launched in November 1857. Owing to an ill-advised attempt to retard her motion down the slips, the chain-winding machinery gave way, and the launch proved abortive. But she was successfully floated in 1858 and took her trial trip down the river and round the coast. Opposite Hastings, a case-pipe feeder burst, causing some loss of life among the crew, and doing local damage to the extent of several thousand pounds, one funnel being blown 50 feet high into the air. The vessel was otherwise unaffected by the shock, was found to be rigid and steady in a heavy sea, and finally put into Portland for repairs. In 1860, her maiden voyage to New York, where she received an ovation, marked the beginning of an era. For though years elapsed before engineers again dared to project anything approaching the Great Eastern in size, it had been conclusively demonstrated that an iron steamship of vast proportions, laden with passengers and cargo, could, in spite of all prophecies to the contrary, triumph over the perils of the Atlantic and make good time as a mail carrier. Her very faults of design have been an example to guide inventors toward the masterly lines of our modern ocean greyhounds. The Great Eastern's accommodation was conceived upon a scale of magnificence hitherto undreamed of. Between uprights she was 680 feet long, but her upper deck gave 12 feet extra length, and her width of 82 feet 6 inches was expanded by the platforms of the immense paddle boxes to 119 feet. In height, she towered 60 feet above her keel, half of this being submerged when loaded, though she drew only 20 feet of water in ballast. 5 great funnels 100 feet high and 6 lofty tapering masts fitted with square spars that carried an enormous spread of canvas rose above the massive hull and rendered her the most imposing vessel that ever rode the seas. Her internal arrangements were worthy of this majestic exterior. She was built upon the cellular principle, that is, she consisted of an inner and outer hull, both iron-plated, some 2 feet 10 inches apart, up to 3 feet above the waterline, and the interior was divided into 19 separate compartments, 12 of which were watertight and the others nearly so. Her principal saloon was 100 feet long, 36 feet wide, and 13 feet high, the whole center of the ship being given up to saloon and cabin accommodation, carefully protected from disturbing noise or vibration of the engines. Fittings and decorations were on the most lavish scale, initiating the luxurious appointments of the present day. 800 first-class passengers were provided for, 2,000 second-class, and 1,000 third-class, while in case of emergency she could pack 10,000 troops on board without restricting their ordinary space for quarters. The ship's complement was 400 men, all told, and the coal bunkers carried 12,000 tons, enough to take her to Australia or India and back without recoaling, besides the 6,000 tons of cargo to be stowed in the holds. This immense weight had for motive power 10 boilers weighing 50 tons each, divided among separate sets of engines, some of which worked a screw propeller 25 feet in diameter, while others turned the gigantic paddle wheels, each 56 feet across, and weighing 185 tons. 12 tons of coal per hour were consumed, but the speed hardly exceeded 14 knots, though a considerably better result had been anticipated. The IHP of the paddle engines was 3,000 normal to 5,000 under full pressure, and that of the screw engines could be raised from 4,000 under ordinary pressure to 6,500 when desired. We need not follow the Great Eastern's eventful history, which will be fresh in most minds. How one steamship company after another collapsed in employing her for her original purpose, then the useful work which she did for years as a cable-laying ship between England and America, India, etc. Finally, her most unqualified success when she was chartered as a show at Liverpool in 1886-87, her hull and machinery being still quite sound, though somewhat off color with long neglect. She was sold piecemeal, an auction of scrap iron and old timber. Such is the last scene in which figures this extraordinary feat of marine engineering, after 30 years of such vicissitudes as surely no other ship has ever experienced. Nor are any of the creations of our own day likely to pass through so romantically checkered an existence. The failure of Brunel's Great Eastern as a commercial speculation gave pause to other inventors for many years. Modest liners of 7,000 to 8,000 tons continued to bear the ocean traffic, and not until 1889 was a displacement, expressed in 5 figures, again attempted. A reaction, however, in the direction of large passenger ships has set in and grown steadily since the city of Paris, with her 10,670 tons, found favor in 1889, and upon the memorable appearance of the Oceanic in 1899, the Great Eastern was at last actually exceeded both in length and tonnage. Most of the great express steamers, to whatever nation they belong, are subsidized by their respective governments to be used as swift cruisers in time of war. They are, therefore, so constructed that the concussion of heavy artillery may not endanger their stability, while the double bottom and watertight compartments reduce the results of any accident to the hull to a minimum. The framework of these grand liners, which bear to and fro such a precious living freight, is as massive and rigid as that of any man of war. And where iron was employed a few years ago, we now find casings of the finest tempered steel, nickel, and bronze. Only the best and most modern materials and appliances are used. everything being brought from year to year most rigorously up to date, and every measurement to the minutest particular, every line or curve of framing or plating, every detail of weight and form required for the interior or fittings is calculated and worked out on paper before the keel of the new vessel is laid upon the building slips. The first process undertaken in the shipyards, therefore, after the draftsman's designs and computations have been completed, is the drawing or scribing of the proposed vessel's frame to the exact dimensions of the matured plan. This is done in a shed or loft whose floor is an immense scribe board, upon which the precise form of every frame in the ship is sketched to scale, and full-size molds or shapes are prepared. Near at hand is an iron platform with furnaces attached large enough to contain the whole of a ship's ridge, though it may be over 60 feet long. The frame and bars, being heat-treated till malleable, are drawn from the furnace onto the iron floor and there bent into the required shape between pegs previously arranged. But before this final bending, the frame has been punched for rivets and cut to the right length, and frequently its edges have been beveled while it is hot. The punching, shearing, and beveling machines are therefore also arranged in close proximity to the furnaces and platform. The angle bars are similarly punched and finished. The beams are prepared in the same fashion, their holes punched and knees or angles formed at the ends, after which they are beveled and curved. By this time, the keel has been fashioned and laid at the bottom of the building berth, or other keelsons being laid parallel with it, and girders or stringers between them. As the ribs are ready, they are brought to the slips and riveted each into its appointed place, transversely to the keelsons. The beams or horizontal frames overhead holding the outer framework in shape, while wooden ribbons are bolted temporarily to the frames to fair the whole structure to its correct form. The watertight bulkheads, that is, the partitions which divide up the interior of the ship into compartments, having been worked elsewhere, are also brought up and adjusted, helping to give strength and rigidity. Most of them are placed across the hull, which is, however, also divided longitudinally for a great part of its length. The framing, or first part of the construction, may now be considered complete, the whole outline of the vessel standing ready in skeleton for the second operation of plating. The huge iron or steel plates, often 30 feet in length, which, attached to the ribs, form the shell plating, and to the beams the deck plating, have meanwhile been cast from molds or templates previously made of the exact size and marked with holes corresponding to those in the framing. The position of the holes being transferred from the mold to the plate, they are punched out and the edges of the plate then sheared. The edges and butts have also to be planed and the rivet holes countersunk, while in some cases the plate must be bent before use. This is done in a machine containing 3 rollers, 2 of which receive the plate between them. The third roller is then raised or lowered against the free part till its pressure, several times repeated, gives the desired curve without any reheating being necessary. Some shipbuilders also treat the edges of the plates by a system called joggling, for which special machinery is provided, which bends them to overlap in such a manner that no strips of lining metal are required. Thus, a saving is effected both of labor and of extra weight in construction. The plate now is ready for incorporation into the growing vessel. It is lifted to its place by mechanical power. The red-hot rivets are dropped into their holes, and a few blows of a riveting hammer spread and secure their ends. Plate by plate, the outside of the vessel is covered with its metal skin. The edges of the plates are minutely faired and caulked. The inner hull or false bottom is similarly treated. Then the beams receive their complement of plating, and the decks spring into existence. The shell is complete and waits its motive power and interior fittings. But we will pause for a moment to consider the means by which these various processes of manufacture have been carried through. Hand-worked machinery is rapidly being superseded by wonderfully ingenious and powerful machines, run either by steam engines, by hydraulic or pneumatic power, or by electricity. A combination of punching and shearing machines is generally employed, having gaps deep enough to take half the width of the largest plate required. The plate, often supported by chains, is mechanically fed through the gap, but 2 or 3 workmen may be needed to guide it and to regulate the distance of the holes, which are stamped out by the punch falling sharply against a die. Certain machines working horizontally are used for angle bars and beams. Therefore, they do not need a wide gap and are often combined with an apparatus for bending and straightening the beams and bars, and with shears for cutting angles. Further on, we see one of the multiple punches, which can stamp 47 holes at a time through 7/16-inch plates, most valuable for tank work, pontoons, and so on. For all large and heavy work, hydraulic power is greatly in request throughout those countries whose winter cold is not severe enough to impede its use. We therefore find it much employed in English shipyards, for such operations as punching manholes, flanging plates, or hoisting and riveting large superficies. One of these heavy hydraulic presses can do flanging and joggling, and also punch manholes 21 inches by 18 inches through plates 8/4 inch thick. Another punches 1.5-inch holes in 1.5-inch plates, 36 inches from the edge at one end, while at the other end it shears similar plates 33 inches from the edge between 2 steel plates set at the required angle. And an arrangement in the body of the machine enables it to cut channels and tees, or to chop through angle bars 6 inches by 6 inches by 3/4 of an inch in dimensions. Yonder massive machine, surmounted by huge wheels, is equally versatile and still more powerful. It quietly bends cold iron beams from 12 inches to 16 inches deep, works a big horizontal punch, and, with 2 sets of shears, cuts angles and notches to any section. This one, with 42-inch deep gaps, can stamp 2 holes 1 inch wide through 1 inch steel at each blow, and the other with 2 gaps, 48 inches deep, punches rivet holes and cuts notches in stringer plates 10 inches by 8 inches by 7/8 of an inch. Not far from these is the long plate edge planing machine, which takes an easy cut off a 2-inch plate, planing 24 feet at a stretch. Those long arms with the drills operating from them are the countersinking machines, used in groups that they may get to work simultaneously upon the same plate in order to save time, as the greater proportion of rivet holes require this treatment. We notice in passing that the heavy beveling machines, which have to manipulate the bars or angle iron while hot, are mounted upon rails to facilitate their being run up to the mouth of the furnace. The plate bending machines already mentioned are still more elaborate in structure and consequently very expensive. Indeed, they may cost anything up to 5,000 pounds. Whether working horizontally or vertically, they have to be extremely powerful, the rollers often needing to be braced by strong girders carrying intermediate rollers, lest they should be buckled themselves. Those made for straightening out plates up to 8 feet wide by 1¼ inches thick consist of several rollers, while that which prepares the plates to cover the masts rolls them into a complete cylinder, which is removed by being drawn off one end of the upper roller. There stands an hydraulic keel plate bending machine, which can curve both sides of a keel plate at the same time. And any of these various machines can be fitted with hydraulic cranes, etc., to handle the plates. Smaller, lighter tools, manipulated by separate workmen, may also be driven by hydraulic power with the greatest advantage. Hydraulic riveting machines are now almost universally used in British shipyards. These perform their work of burring the heads of rivets by the irresistible power of water pressure, which slowly molds the free end of the rivet as soon as the jaws of the machine have been brought in position so as to grip the rivet longitudinally. The use of hydraulic riveters, which can be applied to the major part of a ship's frame and plates, affects a saving in cost of 30 to 40%, and the work is done better than by hand. In America, preference is given to the pneumatic riveter, a small tool which, under an air pressure of 100 to 150 pounds per square inch, delivers several hundred blows a minute on the tail of the rivet, with a force and rapidity which soon spreads the metal. These tools, being light enough for a workman to carry easily in his hands, are very convenient in many ways, but at present have not found much favor on this side of the Atlantic. In certain of our shipbuilding yards, however, we find pneumatic riveters, caulkers, and clippers coming into greater use, mainly on account of their portable character, which enables them to be applied quickly to their work. In some cases, a pneumatic holding-on hammer is combined with the riveter, though as a rule, the holder-on is separate. Punching, boring, deck plating, etc., may also be carried on pneumatically, some large drills being in use, but electrically driven tools seem preferred for these and similar operations. To deal with the enormous expanse of the modern Argo and the very large and heavy plates now used for its outer covering, correspondingly gigantesque plant is being devised. Huge revolving derricks worked by electricity lift the heavy portions and install them in their place. At the Newport News Yard in America, a cantilever crane, each arm extending 89 feet from the center and able to deal with weights of from 4 tons to 12 tons according to position, moves on a trestle 735 feet long. Messrs. Harland and Wolff use a traveling gantry, first designed for the Oceanic, which strides across the vessel under construction and runs on rails laid parallel with its bed. This is provided with 3 traversing cranes and 4 4-ton swing cranes to facilitate operations. Many of the shell plates in the Celtic and Cedric weigh 3 to 4 tons, and larger pieces of the ships, such as the stern frame, weigh over 50 tons. The famous Vulcan works, Stettin, hoist their huge fittings into place with an enormous sheer-legs crane, whose chain tackle, strong enough to move 100-ton guns if required, can readily deal with such items as pumps, shafts, funnels, boilers, and masts. Some constructors raise a colossal framework to form the building shed upon the sides and under the roof of which both fixed and movable cranes are arranged to carry and deposit materials or to support machines and tools. All such shipbuilding plant is very costly to set up, and the machines are expensive to keep in order. However, the economy in labor and the increased rate of output rendered possible make it worthwhile to incur the expenditure. For though the largest sized ships are found to require a greater proportionate outlay on construction than smaller ones, they are much cheaper to run. All such expenses as loading, coal consumption, and harbor charge falling less heavily when divided over a large cargo. So the tendency of the epoch is to increase the size of vessels year by year. This fact is being brought home even to the most conservative dock owners, and the movement towards widening and deepening harbor and dock accommodation is nearly universal. Both at the mouth of the Mississippi and in New York, the entrances are being dredged for a draft of 40 feet, and those European docks, which, like Southampton and Hamburg, have kept abreast of the times, are attracting the most flourishing trade. It has been calculated that within the half-century, our principal liners will measure 1,000 feet in length by 100 feet in breadth and draw over 30 feet of water. The White Star Company and the North German lines have during late years become rivals in running ships of unusual speed and capacity. Building against each other, they have succeeded in producing veritable floating palaces. There is, however, a fundamental difference in the working principles to which each pins its faith. Every half knot gained in speed means an enormously higher coal consumption, since the resistance offered by water to a body moving through it increases more rapidly than the resultant velocity. Practically, the resistance varies as the square of the velocity. Hence, to double the speed, it would be necessary to quadruple the impelling force, and engines of 8 times the power would be required. That is, the motive energy must be increased in ratio with the cube of the velocity. For example, the engine power producing 15 miles per hour would have to be 27 times greater than for 5 miles per hour. The Cunard flyers, Campania and Lusania, which till recently held the record for swift Atlantic passages, make 22 knots with 28,000 horsepower. But to get 2 additional knots per hour, 48,000 horsepower would be necessary, and the addition of 290 tons of coal to the present 460 tons consumed per day. German enterprise is bending all its energies to solve the problem of how to add this extra speed without swamping profits by the initial cost and fuel bill of such powerful engines. The English-speaking company is inclined to spend less on dispatch and to make their gains off large freights and lower fares. In 1897, the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, with a length of 680 feet and a gross tonnage of 20,880 tons, was the biggest thing afloat. and her record speed of 23 knots wrested from England the blue ribbon of the sea. But the Oceanic, measuring 704 feet from end to end and of 30,000 tons displacement at load line, was even then upon the stocks at Belfast, and her maiden voyage was watched with exceptional interest. She was built to be a mail and passenger steamer of the finest type and largest size, and soon proved herself to combine speed, steadiness, and comfort with her immense capacity. The Hamburg American line replied with the Deutschland, launching in 1900 at 16,500 tons, which made the record passage to New York of 5 days, 7 hours, 38 minutes, doing as much as 23.51 knots an hour. The Kronprinz Wilhelm of the North German line runs her closely with 23.21 knots per hour on occasion. Meanwhile, Messrs. Harland and Wolff's building yard at Belfast was exerting itself to outdo even its former triumph in size, the Oceanic, by producing her giant sister, the Celtic, and consequently the Cedric. In emulation of these, the Vulcan Company at Stettin has followed up its first Kaiser Wilhelm by a second of the name, which is to surpass, so we are assured, every previous marvel of machine architecture. Largest of all the vessels ever built is the new twin-screw steamer Cedric, with gross tonnage of 21,000 tons, the Celtic being the first to exceed 20,000 tons, and a load line displacement of 37,870 tons. The Oceanic is luxurious and rapid, her speed averaging 21 knots per hour. But the Celtic and Cedric were designed as combination ships, adding huge cargo carrying capacity to comfortable passenger accommodation for those whose desideratum is a moderate charge. Externally, they are striking vessels, but their immense size is so masked by perfect proportion and graceful lines that it can only be appreciated when in comparison with others. Standing on the captain's bridge of the Cedric, we gaze dizzily down to the keel 100 feet below, an elevation comprising no fewer than 9 decks, and endeavor to realize that in full length and width the great structure measures 700 feet by 75 feet, 5 feet wider than the Oceanic. Then the eye is gradually carried upward by the 4 tall masts, and turns almost with awe upon the pair of monster funnels, 15 feet 9 inches by 12 feet in diameter, towering 120 feet above the top of their fire grates. 8 boilers supply steam for working the Harland and Wolff quadruple expansion engines of 14,000 horsepower, which, being perfectly balanced and driven at a medium speed of 17 knots, not only consume less coal, but almost do away with the vibration which has such a disagreeable effect in very fast steamers. First-class accommodation is all amidships, on the upper bridge and boat decks. The sitting rooms, forming an imposing suite both in size and in style of decoration. The splendid dining saloon on the upper deck, superbly illuminated through a domed skylight, its paneled walls embellished by deep moldings and alabaster frieze, its ceiling, brilliant in white and gold, extends the whole breadth of the ship, and will seat over 300 guests at once. The library, dedicated chiefly to the ladies, is a luxuriously furnished apartment. Cozy chairs and lounges, writing tables, rich pile carpets, carefully screened lights, and a perfect system of ventilation provide the acme of comfort. A little way removed is the spacious smoking room, its walls more soberly and appropriately hung with embossed leather, and its plenishings all that the heart of a man can desire. There are single-berth staterooms, a rare convenience, ordinarily staterooms for 2 or more persons, and suites, consisting of bed, sitting, and bathrooms for families or those who desire privacy. Small adjustable tables and square windows with screw ventilators are special features in the bridge deck chambers. The second class has corresponding accommodation aft, on the upper and bridge decks, almost equally handsome and convenient in its appointment, with bedrooms, bathrooms, etc., all of the latest type. While the third-class passengers are domiciled upon the upper, middle, and lower decks, either in separate cabins or in open berths, little inferior to what was the highest-priced accommodation a few years ago. For those who are prepared, a series of comfortable dining, sitting, and smoking rooms, and the ventilation by a system of electric and steam fans, bathing facilities, electric lighting, and so on, are, as elsewhere, ordered upon the most approved principles. Each class of passengers, and the ship's own company, has its entirely separate equipment of cuisine, and there are well-found quarters for the crew, who number some 350. Of these, about 100 men are employed in the engine department below decks, and nearly twice as many serve the visitors in various capacities, the rest being deckhands. After a stroll along the promenades, and a rest beneath the snowy awnings which make cool retreats from the midday sun, we pass from one story to another by means of broad stairways and along corridors where the feet tread noiselessly and securely upon patent rubber flooring in artistic designs, and descend to what may be termed the business premises of this great marine hostelry. Again, we encounter fresh marvels at every step, till there is no more spirit left in us to put another question, and no words can hope to convey the impression left on our minds of magnitude, of mechanical force, of almost limitless foresight and efficiency. How have the dry bones been clad, the echoing compartments been filled, since we watched the skeleton of the mighty fabric rise with clang of metal upon metal? What thousands of tons of fittings and furnishings, and every manner of provision, have been hoisted into her and bestowed among her numerous decks before this queen of the seas took her first trip westwards as one of the links of empire. Amidships, its distribution, carefully calculated to preserve balance and to minimize strain upon the hull, the machinery which provides motive power for this vast dead weight is situated. Here are the great steam engines with all their appurtenances. To the untrained eye, a bewildering confusion of wheels and cylinders, cranks and rods, the boilers and their supply tanks, the exhaust pipes and ventilators, the succession of coal bunkers arranged to form a protection round the engines which they feed, to explore the length of the massive driving shafts which convey the engine's energy from the center of the ship to the propellers at the stern would be a journey in itself. Incidentally, we are introduced to some of the auxiliary engines for steering, pumping, and ventilation, to the electric plant, to the system of telephonic communication, and the wireless telegraphy office, and forming the very basement of the whole building, between the two skins of the hull, lie, rather to be guessed at than seen, the huge water tanks, tanks to hold hundreds of tons of fresh water, tanks to supply the boilers, and the water ballast which trims the ship and can be periodically increased to compensate consumption of coal and provisions during the voyage. Glance in passing into the extensive holds crowded with cargo, which is let down from above by cranes and winches attached to the decks. That massive door guards the strong room wherein all valuables are deposited beneath the captain's care. And this is the entrance to the freezing chamber, in which meat and other necessities are kept fresh to the very end of the journey. There are furlongs of hose and with forcing engines, and all other appliances to fight the great enemy of sea-going craft. The sturdy crew seem as well trained in their fire drill as in manning the flotilla of boats that swing from the davits above, prepared for all emergencies. Admire now the airy kitchens, equipped with every latest invention to save the cook's labor, and their spacious sculleries and pantries, the laundries, storerooms, cupboards, wine bins, and all the other domestic paraphernalia of a first-class hotel. But what hotel had ever to provide for so many resident guests? Where is the manager who could serenely contemplate the cutting off of his establishment from all outside support for several consecutive days? No fishmonger, no milkman, no newspaper boys, neither restaurant, picture gallery, nor theater for the ennuis to resort to. And upon these big liners, we find not merely such an assembly as might fill the most capricious hotel, but a population equal to that of many a country town, 365 first-class passengers, 160 second-class, and 2,352 steerage, with the vessel's own quorum, bring up the temporary inmates of the Cedric to nearly 3,300 souls. Let them enter the vessel 2 by 2, the time-honored fashion in which our youthful fingers filled the animals toward the ark. They would make a procession about 2 miles long, or domicile them in houses 4 or 5 stories high, allowing 10 persons to a house and 2 feet of frontage to a person. They would fill both sides of a street 5 furlongs, 5/8 of a mile in length. And all these men, women, and children must be housed and fed, waited upon, and amused, according to their varying requirements, for the space of a week. Calculate the amount of household provision, not simply food of all kinds, liquid and solid, but china, plate, linen, napery, the daily toll of 500 servettes alone. All is there, however, awaiting them before they set on board. All the conveniences of everyday life in cities, demanded by the most exigent traveler. The ever-recurring dainty meals served by deft-handed waiters, white cloths and glistening glass and silver, palms and ferns and fresh flowers to rest the eye. There is space for games to exercise the athletic. Music and dancing speed the evening hours, while chatting lazily in the cigar store or refreshment bar, we might forget that we are being carried swiftly across the ocean, save for the breeze which soothes and refreshes our business-jaded faculties. And this, upon a steamer designed chiefly for a freight carrier. In the Deutschland and the Kaiser Wilhelm II, we recognize the opposite type of vessel, that built only for conveying mails and passengers at the highest speed. The conclusion apparently arrived at by English and American companies, that excessive speed, which means enormous first cost and extravagant running expenses, does not pay, is here controverted, for the large subsidies provided by government enable the German express liners to pay their way every trip, and when full, to make a large profit. The Kaiser Wilhelm II represents the ne plus ultra of luxury which 20th century civilization has produced, the rush for wealth which must preclude enjoyment in its possession. The first requisite is hurry, to clench a bargain, to start a new undertaking. So the main engines are the most powerful ever designed, composing a structure 92 feet long and 43 feet 4 inches in height. The weight of the crankshafts alone being 252,000 pounds. A plant of 19 boilers provides steam for 4 quadruple expansion engines, which produce about 40,000 IHP and are intended to drive her through the water at a rate approaching 24 knots. The condensers, through which the steam passes after leaving the last cylinder, are a mass of narrow tubes aggregating 40 miles if laid end to end. The complete driving shaft is 230 feet long, and the 4-bladed bronze propellers, they work at 80 revolutions per minute, are 22 feet 10 inches in diameter. The boiler rooms and coal bunkers, the latter containing 5,700 tons, have a total length of 295 feet, and the coal is conveyed to the furnaces along a railway track measuring double that length. Fresh air is conducted to the boiler rooms through large cowls 69 feet long, and the combustion gases discharge themselves by 4 funnels, as in other ships of the same line. The cast steel stern post is of the enormous weight of 253,000 pounds, and the rudder has an elaborate steel protection in case of war. Into this cigar-shaped extension, a special steering engine is built, supplemented by one upon the poop deck, and by a hand-moved tiller should the machinery fail. The Kaiser Wilhelm II is about the same length as the Cedric, but her beam is 3 feet narrower and her tonnage considerably less, as she is not a cargo steamer. Every modern improvement to ensure safety amid the perils of the seas has been elaborated, such as exceptional thickness of keel plating, 18 watertight bulkheads, an extensive system of water and steam pipes, and electric alarm bells to guard against fire. The fleet of 26 boats and 27 powerful steam pumps, which can between them discharge 9,360 tons of water per hour. Besides the ship's complement of 600 men, 1,888 passengers have to be catered for, 773 first class, 343 second class, and 770 third class. There are 4 separate kitchens, of which the one for the first class alone is 56 feet long and 30 feet wide. Its pantry measures 70 feet by 18 feet, and the sculleries 36 feet by 17 feet. All other appointments in proportion. The storerooms are of vast dimensions, providing a space of 26,000 cubic feet, with refrigerators to keep the contents cool and a large supply of ice for use. Space fails us to enumerate the minute particulars of accommodation made for travelers' needs or idiosyncrasies. 2 doctors with a drugstore at their disposal are ready to attend upon the sick. A dark room awaits the enthusiastic amateur photographer. 2 Wiener cafes combine the open-air enjoyments of the fatherland with a far-reaching prospect of the glorious sea. A barber's shop lessens the trials of the toilet, and the electric system installed throughout the ship is carried into such practical detail that we may equally light our cigars or curl our hair by electricity. The children have a saloon to themselves, prettily decorated in red and white, and its walls adorned with paintings representing popular fairy tales. As for the architecture of the suites of assembly rooms, the dining saloon, drawing room, smoking rooms, vestibules, and corridors, and the great light well, whose balconies are supported on graceful colonnades, does it not present the very semblance of a fairy tale vivified in the mere description? The schemes of aesthetic coloring, varied by pictures and statuettes by eminent artists, the stained glass and rich brass ornamentations, the lacquer work in similitude of birds and flowers, the silken curtains, the exquisite mingling of shades, in carpets and draperies, all read like a scene from the White Cat's Palace of Delights. But we are brought back by a sudden shock to the stern realities of life. Saluting Ludwig Noster's fine portrait of the sovereign, whose name the sumptuous vessel bears, we cross the deck reluctantly to leave her, and there confront us the metal beds that enable the peaceful express steamer to develop into a vessel of destruction within a fortnight of the first rumor of coming war. The end of Chapter 16. Read by Edward Foster, Sunrise Beach, Missouri.